Do you think a Spider-Man team-up movie could work? I do, and I think it could be the most amazing thing the MCU has ever done. Yes, even more amazing than No Way Home. Recently, I've presented my pitches for what an Amazing Spider-Man 3 would look like and what a Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 4 would look like, but now I'm going to present you with the biggest pitch yet when it comes to a team-up movie with all three live-action Spider-Men. What would cause these web-slingers to come together for another epic movie? A live-action Spider-Verse? Fighting Sony Sinister 6? The eventual Multiverse War? There's so much to talk about today, so let's get started. Okay, look, I would be happy if we had a 3-hour movie of just Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield in a room together talking about how much they hate their versions of J. Jonah Jameson and building each other up through positive reinforcement. But I guess I understand why they wouldn't do that. No, if the three Spider-Men teamed up for a full movie, then the reasoning would have to be epic. And there's a bunch of stories and possibilities that I'm going to get into soon, but first I wanted to mention how important a Spider-Man team-up movie would be, because I think we're in a very crucial time right now in the MCU. We're entering full-on multiverse mode, and while that opens up a whole new story and whole new possibilities, I have some small doubts about sustainability and overall stakes. I've heard the potential issue with the multiverse being that when you introduce infinite universes, then the stakes cease to matter as much. Why should I care about a new universe with new characters when I know there's another universe out there that's almost exactly the same? If a character bites the dust, why should I care when there's another version of them out there? Now, understand that I personally don't agree with that take. I get that every universe has similar characters, but they're different versions of those characters. If they bring back Black Widow or Iron Man in a different universe, that doesn't automatically undo their character's sacrifice in our main universe. And I really think a full-on Spidey team-up movie could help drive that point home. Think about it. Seeing a movie with all three of them again would be able to highlight that yes, these are all Spider-Men, but they come from a completely different set of circumstances, and emphasize that although they all wear that Spidey emblem and have similarities, they aren't carbon copies of each other. So it would help the multiversal story the MCU is trying to tell, while also giving us Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, and Tobey Maguire swinging around together. That's a win-win in my book. Okay, let's talk some possible plots and stories on what a team-up Spider-Man movie would look like. The first I wanted to get into is an adaptation of Secret Wars. Now, there are basically two big Secret Wars comic storylines. The original one was about how the Beyonder brought together heroes and villains from Earth to a place called Battleworld to fight it out, and then a more recent one that involved Dr. Doom becoming God Emperor Doom and creating a new universe that meshed together all the universes across the multiverse into one new version of Battleworld. Now, the MCU likes to adapt to famous stories, but always do so in a way that fits with their narrative and their overarching franchise. So I don't think we will ever get a straight-up 100% faithful Secret Wars adaptation, but that's fine. The MCU's version of Secret Wars could draw elements from both the comic versions and deliver something truly special, and it depends how intricate they truly want to go with it. Like, I could see two options here. If they really wanted to keep it simple, then I think there's a way to do this movie where the Beyonder, or some other powerful entity, literally plucks these three Spider-Men from their timelines and places them in Battleworld in order to fight a new threat. Hey, maybe the MCU's version of the Beyonder loved No Way Home as much as the rest of us and just want to see the web-slingers have more adventures together. That's the easy, safe version. But a more intricate story would probably involve a storyline where all three Spidey universes are combined into one, and it's up to the three Spider-Men to work together in order to fix things. Now, yes, while that doesn't have a lot to do with Secret Wars in general, the premise is still the same, with having three universes suddenly mashed into each other. Think about how interesting that would be. No Way Home saw the other Spider-Men play around in our universe, so naturally the next progression should see Tom Holland get a taste of Maguire and Garfield's universes. Here's how I would do it. I would make a new Spider-Man trilogy, but what that would consist of would be Tom Holland's Spider-Man 4, Andrew Garfield's Amazing Spider-Man 3, and then Maguire's Spider-Man 4, and then after those movies you have this new Secret War adaptation where their universes combine. That would give audiences a chance to familiarize themselves again with Garfield's and Tobey's universe before mashing it together with Holland's universe. That could be fun, right? Besides Secret Wars, I also wonder about a live-action version of Spider-Verse. This would be the easiest way to tell a story with all three Spider-Man at the center and would be something a lot of fans would love to see. But the issue with that is obviously Into the Spider-Verse and that animated franchise. We know the sequel to the animated hit is called Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, which implies that we're about to see a two-part adventure centered around Miles Morales hopping universes and encountering other Spider-Men. If that's the case, can we really have this animated storyline happen while simultaneously having a live-action Spider-Verse? I just think that's tricky. Maybe if Across the Spider-Verse avoids having Morlun as its villain and tells a different type of story, then Morlun could be saved for a live-action Spider-Man movie where he's trying to hunt down all the spider totems. Again, it might be a bit too complicated because if you have a Spider-Verse movie, you expect even more versions of Spider-Man to pop up, and if you have that in this Spider-Man movie, you're going to take away screen time for the trio that we really want to see. Here's a thought. Maybe there's a way to do it where the animated franchise adapts the Spider-Verse storyline, but then the live-action new Spidey team-up movie adapts the comic storyline Spider-Geddon, which is a sequel to Spider-Verse. That way you could have both franchises tell their own stories but still be loosely connected? I'm not saying that's impossible, I'm just saying it's a bit tricky. Maybe it's best to leave that story alone for now. Though I will say that the core of a Spider-Verse story would be how every universe needs a Spider-Man, and that emotional through line would be fascinating to examine in live action. No Way Home showed us what makes a Spider-Man, so the next team-up movie should showcase why they're important to their universe overall, and that could be what makes a Spider-Verse so important. That's just my thought. Let's get away from comic storylines for a second and focus mainly on the movie franchise. Yes, there are a ton of comic stories to adapt that could give us an epic Spider-Man team-up, but let's look at what's already available. Yes, I'm talking about the Sony universe. The multiverse is really opening up the connection between the Sonyverse and the MCU, and it's going to be very interesting watching how these two universes interact with each other in the coming years. We were supposed to have the answer by now with the Morbius film, since its trailer was all about Spider-Man references, and will hopefully clear up how this is specifically going to work. But that movie keeps getting delayed. I think as of now the movie is on the schedule for April of 2053, so we're closer than ever before. Though it's really clear at least that the Sonyverse is building toward their own version of Sinister Six. Likely that will include Venom, Morbius, Kraven the Hunter, and Vulture, and if they're smart, they'd use Scorpion. I'll let you guys pick the sixth member if you want. Maybe the version of Madam Web that Dakota Johnson was just announced to be playing, but who knows? Anyways, the point is, with the build-up to the Sinister Six, could we ever get a Sinister Six movie where the villains have to fight the three Spider-Man? I mean, think about it. Yes, in the comics, Spidey fights the six of these villains all the time by himself, but in a movie, that's a lot to handle. By pitting three Spider-Man against six villains could be the type of huge, extravagant event film the Spider-Man movies have become recently. In fact, I want to build off my Secret Wars idea a bit. Maybe in this version of Secret Wars, the three Spider-Men and the Sinister Six are transported to Battleworld and are told that only the winners will be allowed to leave. That sets up the stakes pretty clearly, finds a way for all the Spider-Man and the Sinister Six to be in one location fighting, and is a fun way to cross over the MCU with the Sonyverse. Now the big question is, with the Sinister Six fighting the three Spider-Man, who gets to face whom? Each of them would be responsible for two villains, I would imagine. I'd say let Tobey Maguire fight Venom and Vulture, let Andrew Garfield fight Scorpion and Kraven the Hunter, and then let Tom Holland fight Morbius and Madam Web. I think that's a fun, fair balance, don't you? I love all those ideas, but just to cover our bases, are there any villains that I'm missing that could successfully pose a threat to our three Spider-Men? Like, no offense, but I don't see Kingpin or Chameleon or Rhino being a big enough threat for all three Spider-Men to reunite. That's the one issue with another big team-up movie like this, is that the threat has got to match this extraordinary team-up. I'm gonna throw one more out there that's probably a bit controversial. What if the three Spider-Men had to face the Jackal in an adaptation of the Clone Saga? Now, I totally get it. The Clone Saga is one of the most controversial Spider-Man stories out there, and there's no way to make that story as is. But then look at No Way Home, which successfully took the best parts and the core of One More Day and crafted a truly amazing Spider-Man story. Why couldn't they do that with the Clone Saga? Maybe just keep the idea that there are a bunch of clones of Spider-Man running around in the MCU, and not knowing who to trust, Holland's Spider-Man maybe turns to his other Spider-Men for help? Then again, I think you have way better villain options like the ones I've mentioned earlier, but I'm just trying to present all the choices. Okay, so I talked a lot about who these three Spider-Men could punch and what type of story they could be involved with. But I next want to talk about the real core of the movie, and that's examining the relationship between these three Spider-Men. The real treat of this team-up movie would be having situations where Holland, Garfield, and Maguire can just bounce off each other and learn from one another. The scenes in No Way Home where the three of them just basically sat and compared notes were the highlights of the film, and it would be interesting to see a full film dedicated to the three Spider-Man learning more about each other. Like, for instance, yes, they learned pretty quickly to work as a team in No Way Home after some initial growing pains, but would they always be able to do that? We've learned that Peter Parker will always follow his heart and do what he thinks is right no matter the cost. So what happens if all three Peters disagree on a certain course of action? Would Garfield and Holland fall in line and respect Maguire's Peter because he's older and wiser? Would Holland's Peter still have that bit of teenage naivete and rebellion where he would rebel against his spider doppelgangers? And yeah, No Way Home had them all get along relatively easy because of their connection and similarities with each other, but what about their differences? Could there ever be a bit of jealousy between Garfield and Maguire, since Maguire seems happy with his MJ and Garfield has been living in grief over Gwen for years? These are the types of character interactions I want a future team-up movie to explore. I know I said that I want the focus to be on these three Spider-Men, and introducing other Spider-Men runs the risk of taking away screen time from the true Dream Team, but let me just say one thing about that. Yes, adding 5 more different universe versions of Spider-Man like Golden Sponge Cake Spider-Man or Spider-Man Noir would probably be more distracting than beneficial. But what about just Miles Morales? Throwing Miles into this 3-person Spidey party would immediately cause chaos in all kinds of fun ways. At this stage, he would basically be Holland's Peter's age, and the two could bond like brothers. While both Maguire and Garfield could sort of embrace an odd couple dynamic where suddenly they're basically in charge of mentoring 2 super excitable teenage Spider-Men. I already picture a funny scenario where Maguire tries to be the more serious parents to Holland's Peter and Miles, while Garfield is the fun parent who both has to be an adult but also is still borderline a teenager himself. I'd love it. Okay, here's an idea. Remember how I said it's weird if you have Across the Spider-Verse going on right next to a live-action adaptation of Spider-Verse, starring the 3 Spider-Men? Well, how about you just connect them? Okay, this would be wild, but what if they're able to combine things where a live-action Miles from Into the Spider-Verse can make the jump to live-action for a movie, and then also have the 3 Spider-Men be able to appear in animation in the Across the Spider-Verse sequel? Now that would be truly ambitious, but kind of exciting, right? If the 3 Spider-Men teamed up in their own solo movies, what other characters would you like to see interact with one another? Like, I would love to see Maguire's J. Jonah Jameson interact with Holland's J. Jonah Jameson. Mostly because even though the two look the same, there are key differences between them. Like, I know that we haven't seen as much of Holland's Jameson, but from what we've seen so far is that he clearly loves fear-mongering and only elevated to success after constantly bashing Spider-Man. That's very different than the J. Jonah Jameson of the Maguire universe, who, yes, loved to use Spidey's name to sell papers, but also definitely believed that Spider-Man was a menace. Also, as people love to point out, Maguire's Jameson had a heart underneath the gruff exterior, as evidenced by his unwillingness to give up Peter Parker to the Green Goblin. All that is a really long way of saying that I want to see these 2 Jamesons interact. But who else? What about Holland's MJ and Maguire's MJ? They could talk about what it means to be involved with a superhero. Or maybe you could match up the Flash Thompsons to highlight just how different they are, because that one is definitely noticeable. Before my final point, I just want to say one thing. If the 3 Spider-Men were able to reunite on screen together for a full movie, would that only be the beginning? Does this open the door to more multiversal characters teaming up with each other? Or is Spider-Man the really only one it works for? There's not a lot of other superhero franchises that could spark this much nostalgia and still make for a compelling movie. Like, for example, you can't make a movie about a new Wolverine teaming up with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, because then we just want Hugh Jackman back. You can't do Ben Affleck's Daredevil paired with Charlie Cox's Daredevil, because no one wants to see Ben Affleck's Daredevil again. There is one fun option though that it would work for. What if you have a film that teams up Mark Ruffalo's Hulk, Edward Norton's Hulk, and Eric Bana's Hulk? It would be crazy, but not totally impossible. Plus, more Hulk is always a good thing. Okay, worst case scenario, this team-up movie between Spider-Man never happens, and while that would be a huge bummer, it doesn't necessarily close the book on another Spider-Man team-up between these three actors. It's pretty clear that the MCU is building up to a multiversal war for its post-Endgame event, and if that's truly where the franchise goes in a few years, then maybe in the next Avengers film, there could be a subplot that sees these three Spider-Men have to work together in order to accomplish some task. That wouldn't be as good as a new movie with all three of them starring in it, but at least it would give us a chance to see their banter on the big screen again. I mean, honestly, I'd take anything I could get, wouldn't you? In real life, which of the Spider-Man actors would be most on board with this? I feel like Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield would be up for this experiment, but really I think Tobey Maguire could go either way. He's basically proven all he's needed to with his Spider-Man character. Then again, I think Disney has deep pockets, so maybe Tobey can be enticed if they drop a rhino-sized pile of cash at his front door. Please, MCU, make it happen.